You've been doing the math in your head for months. You know your salary, you have a rough sense of what homes cost in the areas you're considering, you've looked at enough listings to know what the numbers feel like, and somewhere in the back of your mind, you've assembled an informal estimate of what you can afford, a number that feels approximately right based on the monthly payment calculators you've run and the conversations you've had. I want to show you why that number is probably wrong, and I want to do it before you sit across from a lender, before you fall in love with a house that doesn't fit, before you sign something that commits you to a monthly number that slowly reshapes the rest of your financial life around it. Not dramatically wrong in most cases, but wrong in the specific ways that matter, the ways that show up 6 months after closing when the monthly reality of homeownership lands differently than the pre-purchase estimate suggested it would. When the excitement of the new home has settled into routine and the payment that felt manageable at the signing table feels like a permanent fixture you can't move around. Here's the problem. The question most people are answering when they calculate affordability is, what mortgage payment can I technically qualify for? That is a lender's question. It is not your question. Your question is, what total housing cost leaves my financial life functional, my savings rate intact, and my margin sufficient to absorb the things that will inevitably go wrong after you own a home? Those are different questions. They almost always produce different numbers, and the gap between them is where a significant number of homeowners discover, too late, that they bought more house than their salary actually supports. Not because they were careless, because nobody showed them the right calculation before they signed. My name is William. Today, we're going through the real math, salary by salary, city by city, so that the number you arrive at is the right one before you make the largest financial commitment of your life. First, why the lender's number and your number are not the same number. When a mortgage lender evaluates your application, they use a metric called debt-to-income ratio, your total monthly debt payments divided by your gross monthly income. The conventional limit for most mortgage products is 43% to 45% of gross income. Some loan types allow higher. At 43% DTI on a $90,000 gross salary, your gross monthly income is $7,500. The lender will approve a total monthly debt payment, including the proposed mortgage, property tax, insurance, and all existing debt obligations, of up to $3,225. That is the maximum the lender will approve. It is not the maximum you should borrow. Here's why, and this is the part that genuinely changes how people feel about the number they were excited to receive. Your gross income is not what arrives in your account. On $90,000 in a moderate tax state, your take-home after federal tax, state tax, FICA, and a standard employer health insurance contribution lands somewhere between $5,800 and $6,200 a month. The lender calculated your limit against $7,500. You are actually working with $6,000. A $3,225 monthly debt payment against $6,000 in take-home income is 53.75% of your actual spendable income going to debt service, before food, before utilities, before gas, before the home maintenance budget that every financial planner recommends and almost no first-time buyer actually funds, before savings, before the emergency fund that homeownership makes more necessary, not less. I've seen people sign at that ceiling and spend the next 3 years feeling like they're treading water financially, income going up, but never enough slack, never enough margin, never enough left at the end of the month to feel like the house is working for them rather than the other way around. The lender's number tells you what you can borrow. Your take-home tells you what you can actually afford. Build the analysis from the second number, not the first.
The 28% rule, what it means and what it misses. The standard affordability guideline is that your total housing costs should not exceed 28% of your gross monthly income. This rule has been the baseline for responsible mortgage lending for decades, and it is a reasonable starting point, but it contains an assumption worth examining. 28% of gross is not 28% of take-home. On a $90,000 salary, 28% of gross is $2,100. 28% of take-home on the same salary is approximately $1,680. The difference, $420 a month is not a small number when applied to a 30-year housing decision. It's $5,040 annually. It's $151,200 over 30 years. I use the take-home version of this calculation because it reflects the actual financial constraint. Your bills are paid from take-home. Your savings come from take-home. Your life is funded from take-home. A guideline built on gross income is built on a number that never actually arrives in your account, and decisions made against the number that never arrives in your account have a way of feeling confusing and tight every single month. The take-home-based affordability rule I find most reliable is this: your total monthly housing cost, principal, interest, property tax, insurance, and a maintenance reserve should not exceed 30% of your monthly take-home pay, and your total fixed obligations, including that housing cost, should not exceed 50% of take-home. If either threshold is breached, the financial margin available for everything else is insufficient to absorb normal life without consistent stress. That stress is real. I've talked to people living in it. It doesn't feel like a number. It feels like Sunday nights worrying about whether the furnace makes it through winter. It feels like not being able to say yes to things that matter because the house already said yes to everything first. What different salaries actually buy? The real numbers by income level. Let me run the calculation at 5 income levels so the abstraction becomes concrete. At $60,000 gross, your take-home in a moderate tax state is approximately $4,000 to $4,300 a month. At 30% of take-home, your total housing budget is $1,200 to $1,290. At current rates of approximately 6.8% on a 30-year fixed mortgage, a $1,290 principal and interest payment supports a loan of approximately $198,000. With 10% down, that's a purchase price of approximately $220,000. With 20% down, approximately $248,000. In most major American metros, $220,000 to $248,000 does not buy a competitive property. In mid-sized Midwestern and Southern cities, it does. The salary and the market have to be evaluated together. One number without the other is incomplete, and the emotional pull of a specific city or neighborhood has to be weighed against the financial reality of what that city or neighborhood actually costs at your income level. At $80,000 gross, take-home lands around $5,200 to $5,500. Housing budget at 30%, $1,560 to $1,650. Supportable loan at current rates, approximately $240,000 to $253,000. Purchase price with 10% down, approximately $267,000 to $281,000. With 20% down, approximately $300,000 to $316,000. This is the income level where home ownership becomes structurally viable in many markets, not comfortable, but viable, provided the existing debt load is low and the maintenance reserve is actually funded. It's the income level where buying is possible, but where the difference between doing it right and doing it at the ceiling is the difference between owning a home and being owned by one. At $100,000 gross, take-home is approximately $6,000 to $6,400. Housing budget at 30%, $1,800 to $1,920. Supportable loan at current rates, approximately $276,000 to $295,000. Purchase price with 10% down, approximately $307,000 to $328,000. With 20% down, approximately $345,000 to $369,000. At this income level, in most non-coastal markets, meaningful home ownership becomes structurally accessible, though at the upper end of this range, the margin for unexpected costs remains thin. Thin enough that a single bad month, a medical bill, a job disruption, a major repair, can create genuine financial stress in a household that looks stable from the outside. At $160,000 gross, take-home runs approximately $9,500 to $10,200. Housing budget at 30%, $2,850 to $3,060. Supportable loan at current rates, approximately $437,000 to $470,000. Purchase price with 10% down, approximately $485,000 to $522,000. With 20% down, approximately $500,000 $446,000 to $588,000. At this income level, the $500,000 home becomes structurally sound, provided the rest of the financial picture supports it: low existing debt, funded emergency reserve, and a maintenance budget actually included in the monthly calculation. For the first time in this income spectrum, the house stops being the dominant financial pressure and starts being one well-managed component of a broader financial life.
The costs most buyers forget to include and why they matter enormously. Every affordability calculation that stops at principal and interest is incomplete, and the gap between that incomplete calculation and the real one is where most first-time buyers encounter their first unpleasant surprise. Not a catastrophic surprise, a quiet, grinding one that recalibrates how the house feels to live in. Property taxes vary more dramatically by location than most buyers realize. The national average effective rate is approximately 1.1% of assessed value annually. In New Jersey, that rate averages 2.2%. In Illinois, 2.1%. In Texas, 1.6%. In Alabama, 0.4%. On a $380,000 home, the difference between a 2.2% and a 0.4% property tax rate is $6,840 annually, $570 per month. That is not a rounding error. That is a material component of your true housing cost that varies by geography in a way that makes the same mortgage payment produce dramatically different affordability outcomes depending on where the house is located. Homeowners insurance averages approximately $1,800 annually nationally, but varies significantly by state, proximity to flood zones, age of the home, and construction type. Florida averages over $4,000 annually. Oklahoma exceeds $3,500. California coastal markets have seen insurer withdrawals that make coverage difficult to obtain at any price in some zip codes. Before you fall in love with a property, verify that insurance is available and price it specifically, not from a national average. I've seen buyers fall in love with a home and discover the insurance situation weeks before closing. That is not the moment you want to be recalculating affordability. The maintenance reserve is the budget item most buyers omit entirely because it doesn't show up in the mortgage payment and doesn't get collected at closing. The standard recommendation is 1% of home value annually. On a $380,000 home, that's $3,800 per year, $317 per month set aside for the roof, the HVAC, the water heater, the appliances, the plumbing, and the structural surprises that arrive without announcing themselves. This money needs to exist somewhere accessible before something breaks. If it doesn't exist, the repair becomes a credit card charge at 21% interest, which is the most expensive way to maintain a home and the most common way first-time buyers do it. And there is a specific feeling that comes with using a credit card to fix your house, a feeling that the home is winning and you're not. Including all three, property tax, insurance, and maintenance reserve, can add $600 to $1,200 per month to the true cost of home ownership, depending on the property and location. That is the number that needs to fit within your 30% housing budget, not just the mortgage payment, the full number, the one that means you own the house without the house owning you. The down payment reality, what it actually takes to buy at each income level. The down payment threshold changes the affordability equation in two directions simultaneously. It reduces the loan balance and therefore the monthly payment, but it requires liquid capital that most buyers took years to accumulate and cannot easily replace after closing. At 20% down, you avoid private mortgage insurance, PMI, which typically costs 0.5% to 1% of the loan amount annually. On a $300,000 loan, that's $1,500 to $3,000 per year, $125 to $250 per month, for insurance that protects the lender, not you, and disappears once your equity reaches 20%. Reaching the 20% down payment threshold eliminates that cost permanently and meaningfully improves affordability. At 10% down on a $380,000 home, you need $38,000 in cash for the down payment. Add closing costs, typically 2 to 5% of the purchase price, call it $11,400 at 3%. The total cash required at closing is approximately $49,400. That number is separate from your emergency fund, which should remain intact after closing. The buyer who drains their savings to reach closing and has nothing left for the first repair is in a genuinely vulnerable position that a $3,000 HVAC failure can make acutely painful. I want you to feel what that moment is like before it happens, because the people who've lived it describe it as one of the most stressful financial experiences of their lives. The house they worked for years to buy, creating the exact financial pressure they bought it to escape. The realistic pre-purchase savings target, down payment, closing costs, and a post-closing emergency fund of 3 to 6 months of total housing expenses is frequently $60,000 to $90,000 at the $300,000 to $400,000 price point. That is the number worth building toward, not just the down payment, the full number, the one that means you own the house without the house owning you.